Hey, what's up everybody? Hammerheart Metal Reviews here once again. Today we're doing another discography countdown. We're going to be talking about a band that I consider to be severely underrated, and that is Omen. So if you look up the band Omen, you'll probably get a few different versions of the band, or different bands with the same name, I should say. I'm talking about the band from USA that plays traditional heavy metal, US power metal, however you want to label it. They were around from like 1983 till about 1989 or 1990. Then they broke up, and then they got back together with a new incarnation of the band from about 1996 to the present day. I would consider this band to be one of the pioneers of like US power metal or US epic metal, along with bands like Manila Road, Manowar, stuff in that vein. The main man behind the band, Kenny Powell, is the main songwriter and guitar player. He's the only guy that's been there since the beginning and been with them their whole career. As you'll see from my ranking, I consider their first 3 albums to be absolute classics. Those are the ones that you really need to go check out if you haven't checked out this band before. They all featured the vocalist J.D. Kimball. He was only on the first 3 albums before he left the band, and then he did pass away too young as well. His range is not like the most dynamic range out there. It's kind of like in that middle range. He doesn't hit the really high notes, but it suits this music so well, and it really gives it his own voice. And like I said, those first 3 albums are absolute classics. After that, their career kind of went on a downhill. They've kind of been reinvigorated over the last little bit. Maybe their last couple albums are breathing some life back into the band. But honestly, I listen to the first 3 albums all the time. The rest I almost never go back to. I went back and listened to them to do this ranking. We'll see if my opinion on any of them really changed. But honestly, for me, if I'm going to listen to Omen, it's going to be the first 3 albums. We'll see what order I put those in. And the rest, I will say, like, this band, they're not necessarily like the most unique band out there. They definitely were influenced by a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, but they put their own spin on it. It's got a little bit more of a gritty edge to it, and it's just catchy and great, especially on those first 3 albums. Just pure, awesome, catchy heavy metal. And if you're into just great traditional heavy metal with tons of hooks, great guitar, and great vocals, definitely go check out these first 3 albums. But anyways, I'm getting off track. I'm going to rank these from my least favorite down to my favorite. So there's going to be some negative comments here on these first few albums, but don't worry, I do still love this band, and we'll get to the positive stuff later on. So let's kick this off. The album that I like the least by Omen is Reopening the Gates from 1997. So this was their comeback album after a hiatus. This did bring in a new vocalist, which was actually Kenny Powell's son, Greg. But this album does not sound anything like the Omen of old. This really brought in like a groove metal influence. It really sounds a lot like Pantera, to be honest. I think that's what they were going for. This just isn't really a style that I enjoy that much. This album's just not for me, and I'm just not really that interested in this album. I'm not even going to pick favorite songs because this one is just one that I don't really dig at all. I never go back to it. I tried to listen to it for this. I made it through, but I don't like it. It's easy choice for me to be in last place. Nothing really too much for me to talk about. It's in last place because I don't like it. Up next in 6th, I'm going with the album that was right before that, although it was almost a solid 10 years before, Escape to Nowhere from 1988. This was their 4th album. Was the first album without J.D. Kimball on vocals, so they brought in new vocalists. It kind of went in a new direction. This was a complete shift in style from the first 3 albums. This really went in a commercial direction, really stripped down mainstream sound, which is okay. It's just the songs don't really go to too many exciting places. It's very predictable. I consider this one a big disappointment after the first 3 albums. Like, this was only released a couple years after their 3rd album, but yeah, it really shifted gears. There are still shades of bands like Accept or Judas Priest or Sabotage in places, so it might remind you of that. But overall, I just don't really enjoy this one that much either. I don't really ever go back to it. Like, it's okay. This isn't a terrible album. There's still some good guitar licks. There's still some catchy songs. But all in all, it's just not one that I'm going to listen to really too often, if ever again, to be honest. If I had to pick favorite tracks, Cry for the Morning, Poisoned, like, it's okay. It's just not great. All right, up next in 5th place, I am going with their most recent album, which is from 2016, titled Hammer Damage. So this one had another new vocalist, the same one as the album that was right before it, which I haven't talked about yet. This really saw them go into more of like a power metal direction, kind of a return to the 80s sound. Not exactly, but it's a decent album here. Like, the production is not really great. It kind of holds it back. I do find the vocals aren't as strong on this album as the album that was right before it, which I'll talk about after. It is the same guy, but it is 13 years after the previous album, so maybe his voice just was a little more strained. But once again, like, this is okay. It's just not super interesting. There's some decent moments, but it just makes me long for the glory days of the first 3 albums. This one just isn't very good. Favorite tracks, like the title track Hammer Damage is catchy, Cry Havoc is decent. So all in all, like, this is okay. It's not terrible. If you like this album, that's great. Like, it's not bad. It's just not what I want when I listen to an Omen album. So up next in 4th, I'm going to the album that was right before that, from 2003, Eternal Black Dawn. So as I mentioned, this did bring in a new vocalist. This was the follow-up to Reopening the Gates, which was like the groove metal album. This is not that. This vocalist did a better job, and this really was a return to their 80s style of music. It was like more in the US power metal vein, and this was their best album in a long time, for sure. There's really nice solos here. There's catchy choruses. I do enjoy this style for them. I can't put this on par with their early works. It's just not on the level, but nonetheless, this is pretty good. I still don't really go back to this one a ton, but it's not bad. Like, this album is okay. It showed hope for the band again in their later days of their career. You got songs like 1,000 Year Reign and Blood Feud. Like, this is an okay US power metal album, especially for a more modern one. Doesn't stack up to their classics, but nonetheless, it's decent. All right, now we're into the top 3. This is the goods. If you've never checked out this band before, ignore everything I just said. Just go check out all of these 3 albums because they are underrated gems. But let's see what order I have got them in. So coming in 3rd place, I'm actually going with their 3rd album from 1986 titled The Curse. So this one really continues in the style of the first 2 albums, which of course I haven't talked about yet. But to me, like, it doesn't quite reach the height of those first 2 albums, but it's close. This is still pretty good, even if it's not quite as standout. Like I mentioned earlier, this was the last album to feature J.D. Kimball on vocals, and his performance here is still great. There's catchy tunes throughout this whole album. Maybe it doesn't hit you with the same impact as the first 2. It does kind of go into a bit more of a progressive direction in some songs. Like, some of the compositions are just a little bit more drawn out and a little bit more experimentation, but it's still got that root in their original style. And overall, this is a very solid album. The title track to open it up, The Curse, that's a great opening track. Really awesome stuff. Teeth of the Hydra is awesome at all cost. Like, all in all, this album is still really solid. It's just in 3rd place because I like the other 2 a little bit more. Up next, in 2nd place, I'm going all the way back to when it started, to the debut album from 1984, Battle Cry. This album kicks ass. Absolutely amazing. There's a major, like, new wave of British heavy metal influence going on here, but it's got a little bit of a grittier edge. The vocals are great, the solos slay, and it's just full of catchy, memorable songs. It's got, like, sword and sorcery style lyrics. And like I said earlier, this is kind of the beginning of US power metal and epic metal. Not them on their own. There was other bands out there as well around the same time, but just full of, like, up-tempo melodic riffing, and it's just a real treat. These songs put a smile on your face. If you're into old school, just classic heavy metal and have not heard this album, strongly suggest you go change that right now. If I had to pick favorite songs, like, this whole album rips, but the title track, Battle Cry, Dragon's Breath, The Axeman, Death Rider, like, every song on here hits the mark. Really awesome stuff. Based on everything I just said, you probably should think that that would be in 1st place, and it easily could be. These are kind of neck and neck for 1 and 2. For today, it's in 2nd, and that just leaves 1. My favorite Omen album is their sophomore album from 1985, Warning of Danger. This is just pure metal epicness. It takes the template from the debut and builds upon it and improves upon it. You've got Iron Maiden-esque guitar parts, you've got catchy choruses, and that's really what's put this to the #1 spot over the debut for me, is that the choruses are a little bit catchier. There's a few more hooks that are going to stick in your head, and this just front to back metal anthems, wall to wall bangers. This album shreds. It's so much fun. Just absolutely what I want in a traditional heavy metal album. Favorite songs, the title track, Warning of Danger, probably my favorite Omen track, which is tough to say. They've got some real bangers, but that one's up there for sure. March On, Termination, absolutely shreds. Red Horizon. Once again, this whole thing, front to back, amazing stuff. That is my favorite Omen album. So anyways, these are just my thoughts and opinions as usual. Love to get yours down below. If you've heard these guys, let me know what your favorite albums are. If you haven't, go check out these albums, especially the first 3, because those ones all kick ass. So anyways, until next time, Hammer Heart Metal Reviews, out.